Charles. It's another morning edition of Sunday with Charles while you are in an undisclosed international location lamenting her frauds. How are you today, Charles? Good morning. Good evening.
Good morning to you from good evening over here. It's great to be back on air. It's distressing to think about the downward expert ski slope trajectory that the U.S. and the West seems to be on, and just the pace of destruction seems to be accelerating on a daily basis. And the art department has done a wonderful tribute to people who really should be committed to an insane asylum, maybe a separate insane asylums for all these people. Yet most of these people either ran the country or are in the process of running the United States into the ground.
Ruining.
And it's just pathetic. I mean, and there's a really simple way to think about it. All the people pictured, I believe, are, quote, public servants. And what we have now, everyone talks about GDP, gross domestic product is increasing. GDP is a sloppy estimate that combines the contribution to economic activity of the private sector with that of the public sector. And what it does, when you prize those two pieces apart, the public sector is addicted to borrowing, is irresponsible, spends far more than it takes in, it has towering stated debts and unknown contingent liabilities in the form of pensions and other long-term contractual commitments that the government does not explain to the voters. So the public sector is destroying value, and the private sector is trying to create economic value. GDP, there's Simon Kuznets, the man who actually came up with the concept of gross national product, which morphed into gross domestic product. He pointed out in 1934 when he created this, he sent a letter explaining all this stuff to the Senate Finance Committee, and he later won the Nobel Prize in Economics for some of this work. He pointed out the gross defects some of the gross defects that basically, in some cases, double count the contribution of the public sector and fail to consider contributions to economic activity then by people who were wives typically, who were not in the labor workforce, but were performing a lot of valuable benefits to society in the home. Didn't count any of that. So of course, the math leads you to give more and more money and authority to the public sector, which is what's happened over time. And whether it's on our southern border, in Democrat-controlled cities, in Congress, in the Senate, in Washington, D.C., you can't, or inside this country or outside the country, you really can't point to a set of programs that have truly benefited you and me and other people in the private sector, because these calculations of GDP never take into account the incremental debt that the government piles on. And when the government's piling on debt, sometimes the private sector is piling on debt. So the GDP should actually be adjusted to, if you have an increase in debt, GDP should be reduced by that increase in debt, and they don't do that. To put the accounting on in the same sort of footing as happens for companies when they're audited properly. So these people, the art department again has outdone itself. These people run around the country in these motorcades, flying private, going to conventions, giving themselves awards, getting up in front of the Congress as Biden just did, or the Washington Correspondents' Dinner as he did last night, lying his ass off. And nobody...
Was the dinner last night?
Yeah, it was last night.
Oh, I
and he
missed
made
that.
fun of Trump. He made fun. It's closed to the press and closed to the public, and there are now only reports about it. But apparently, he was viciously attacking Trump. He has the balls to stand up at any event and just spout all these claims about how he's rebuilt the economy post-COVID. He's done no such thing. Absolutely no such thing. Every single economic program that this guy has put across the line is an utter disaster. And he's sending his minions around to threaten Congress and to say, the impeachment inquiry is
Gridiron.
over.
Sorry, Charles. Gridiron dinner, not the correspondence dinner.
Or sorry, gridiron dinner. Okay, well, that gridiron dinner is also for the press, and it's closed to the public. So, here's the guy who is his team literally went around and threatened members of Congress, saying, the impeachment inquiry is over, arguably because this Yakov Smirnov, or whatever the first guy's name is, Smirnov, has now been indicted by the Justice Department, the former cooperating witness.
I think Alexander Smirnov.
Alexander, yeah, I always just remember Yakov Smirnov.
Yeah, seems ridiculous.
Right, and so they control the mainstream press, they control publishing, they control, quote, peer-reviewed journals, they control what happens on the academic campi, they control who get honorary awards of all types, and so they're able to shape the narrative, because when they lie, there's nobody in the press room standing up and saying, President Biden, that is a bold-faced lie. Your son did not die in Iraq, and you contrast what we've been told about Biden. He's fit as a fiddle, he's energetic, I wish I was, all that kind of bullshit, with the text of his deposition. I mean, that text, I haven't read, I've just read summaries of it, but I mean, there are numerous places in that deposition where the man is just barely speaking English and certainly not making any sense. Talking about, archery contest, that he hit the target when all he did was he just, launched an arrow into the air and it went into the ground.
Sumo wrestlers, Charles, on the horses.
The sumo wrestlers, and that deposition, if any person I was working with in any of the previous business arrangements I was involved, gave a deposition like that, that person would be fired with prejudice. I mean, it's a preposterous deposition. And then you contrast, there's the story about, I think his name is Mike Lynch. There's a story about it's an Irish, he was raised in England of Irish parents. And this is a guy who went to Cambridge. He's about 10 years younger than I am. And he created several big companies. One of them is called Autonomy. And he sold Autonomy to Hewlett Packard for 11 billion US roughly, in a transaction that was promptly written down by 8.8 billion. And now he's being sued for fraud. And in this long article in The Guardian that I saw on the subject, it mentions that when the Department of Justice launches a criminal prosecution of a target, it has a success rate of about 97%, right? So you have to look at, the deference, look at this case, and look at the deference shown Biden. I'm not going to prosecute, says, Special Counsel Herr, because he's an affable old, coot, and a jury wouldn't convict him. I mean, this is ridiculous. You got Mike Lynch in a leg iron having to post a $100 million bond for a transaction that occurred in 2011, so 13 years ago. And Joe Biden has been selling this country out for the benefit of his family for 50 fucking years. And our Department of Justice says, well, can't really go after him. We're just going to have 91 felony counts against Donald Trump. I mean, our Department of Justice is a laughingstock in front of the world. The IRS is a laughingstock in front of the world. Joe Biden is a laughingstock in front of the world. And as John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, he was interviewed about, when producer price inflation came in twice what people were expecting, 0.6% instead of 0.3%, which is a big difference. Kennedy got up there and he's talking about all sorts of things, and he's just in an offhanded comment. He said in this drawl, which I won't try to do, he said, the Biden administration would lower the average IQ of a large American city by a lot. And he's absolutely right. These
Yeah.
people, whether it's Janet Yellen, now she's saying inflation is not
Well, she
transitory.
regrets saying that.
I mean, come on. I regret that I ran over your little kid in my semi. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. And
Yeah.
and what's especially ridiculous is, I spent some of my life in rural New York State, and by definition, you're going to be cheek to jowl with very poor people when you go into a normal store or whatever. Because in rural New York State, there are a lot of people who actually live off the land, meaning in the hunting season, they bag a bunch
Right.
of stuff and they freeze it or whatever, and they have their own vegetable gardens and stuff like that. Inflation is brutal to the poor,
Yeah.
absolutely brutal. So inflation is transitory. Yellen probably lives in a mansion. She's now in motorcades, flying private, living the high life.
Doing shrooms.
She's or doing shrooms in China. Uh, and it's not okay to brush it all off as they did in the beginning, because they didn't want this blowback for the 2022 election. Just sell bullshit as truth, about the economy, because every single thinking person who goes to a grocery store, fills up his or her gas tank, meets the cost of insurance, meets the cost of education. Every thinking person who is not operating on stolen money or grant money or
Yeah.
DEI bullshit contracts that they shouldn't have in the first place, every sentient person understands that this Biden presidency is already far worse than Carter economically. And yet our press is sitting there, lying. Trump is right about Maggie Haberman and the Russia hoax. She has the Pulitzer Prize, as do some of her co-writers, having pounded into the airways and into print this theory of the Russia hoax, which is a total crap. And now they're trying to resuscitate it. They're at Russia hoax 3.0. Trump, Swalwell tweeted out, Trump is Putin and Putin is Trump.
But hang on, let's go back for a second, Charles, to Smirnov, because just yesterday, I think, 2 days ago, this is an article from CBS News. They're saying ex-FBI informant accused of lying about Biden's was called a fraudster in a previous case. Now, the reason why I find this interesting, Charles, so first of all, you roll out CBS News, 60 Minutes. All the people who think that this stuff is serious say, oh, wait a minute, here's the real answer. Alexander Smirnov, he's a fraudster. Okay, let's not listen to anything that he says. But before today or last week, whenever they came out and said it, this guy was supposedly a reliable FBI informant. And the reason I'm bringing this to your attention, Charles, is because it is remarkably similar to basically exactly what happened to Dennis Montgomery. Now, this is an article from the New York Times written in 2011 by Eric Lichtblau and James Risen. Lichtblau was represented by Boozie's law firm in this prosecution of Sussman. But in this particular case, it's talking about, Dennis Montgomery had bamboozled federal officials. He was also a paid informant to the FBI or the CIA. But here we have in the New York Times, Mr. Montgomery's former lawyer, Michael Flynn, not to be confused with the nonprofit happy former director of the DIA, but Michael Flynn is the name of the attorney under Obama. This is not the same guy. This is an attorney with the same name, but he now describes Dennis Montgomery as a con man. So at some point, the government, the CIA, the FBI thought Montgomery was so great, they paid him millions of dollars. But then when something changed, they have this article in the New York Times that tells you that he's a con man. It's basically exactly the same thing that's been done, as far as we're told, with Smirnov.
Well, in the first instance, I don't believe that the FBI or any government agency should be paying any private person millions of dollars for anything. That's ridiculous. I mean, the second you start doing that, the President of the United States makes, I think, $450,000. Fauci, I think, makes something like $700,000. Before Trump came along, the head of the Tennessee Valley Power Authority was making millions of dollars. But if you're going to say you're a public servant, then there should be a cap on what the staff of the FBI, all these agencies make. And if it is possible for a senior staff person at the FBI to make a decision to pay off this Smirnoff or pay Montgomery or pay somebody else millions of dollars, the temptation for corruption is massive. It's just massive.
Why can't they just say, hey, Montgomery, we're going to pay you $2 million for your fake software. Give $1.5 million of it to me.
Well, I think that kind of shit goes on. I think in the public sector, and who is the person who was supposed to find all this public corruption from about 2010, 11? Exactly. And so, who watches the watchers? Who regulates the regulators? This is an old question from Roman history, maybe before that. So we have here government completely out of control. Again, going back to the Iraq War, where under W. Bush, where billions of dollars of cash was trucked into Iraq and disappeared, and nobody seemed to care where it went. I mean, I hope, I don't know what Trump is up to at this point, what his campaign is up to, but I sincerely hope this time that he has a team that is thinking about this very precisely. What is he going to do on November 5th in the evening or November 6th in the morning? Should he be declared the winner? What happens from that moment, hour by hour, imperative by imperative? Who are the people going to be on the staff? What are the checkpoints? What are the tensions? And what's going to happen on January 20th at noon, 2025 and afterwards? He's got to be thinking much more aggressively about this. And maybe it jinxes him and he's superstitious or suspicious of doing this, but there's not a lot of runway left. And God forbid Biden or now Harris or somebody, or Michelle Obama takes over. And God forbid there are election irregularities and the Democrats control the House and the Senate. We're very dangerous times now, watching these people who are arrogant, stupid, and I would argue rotten to the core in the case of Biden and his handlers, and Bush and his handlers, and Obama and his handlers, and the Clinton and their handlers. These are people who are all sucking off the public tit, spelled T-E-A-T. And they've been doing it their entire lives. Somehow they all have, multiple mansions. Bernie Sanders has 3, Hillary has 4, Obama has at least 4. Bush has the Crawford Ranch, which he shouldn't have, but he has it, and he has probably access to the main place, Walker's Point. It's just the message is out there to the Fannie Willises, to our mayor moron.
I think people want to hear what you have to say about Fannie Willis, Charles. What do you think about the decision from Judge McAfee?
Well, I mean, Rantingly points out that Judge McAfee's running for office, that he and his wife were substantial contributors to the Fannie Willis campaign. I think the entire case is completely discredited. And I don't know what happens on appeal. I'm not a lawyer, but there's a theory that it was elegant of him to do what he did because he didn't put the kibosh immediately now in the case when he could have. I call bullshit on it. This is, people, when you look into this, the thoughtful people go back to Bill Clinton lying under oath about Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky and all that. And that was an atrocious miscarriage of justice. Atrocious. What Bill Clinton allegedly did to Juanita Broaddrick and many others was atrocious. And this principle that got put into law by him, that lying about stuff that would embarrass you and your family is okay and everybody does it, is not true. Lying under oath is really fucking bad, particularly if you're the president of the United States. If you really were honorable, which of course Bill Clinton is not, he's a dishonorable douchebag, you would have resigned rather than put the country and your family through this. But he's not honorable. He wanted to make sure that he grifted to his heart's content. He's been grifting, prior to January 20th, 2001, but certainly on an accentuated basis ever since. And that judge, his law student, I forget the judge's name now, who wrote the opinion on Paul, in the Paul. What happened was Bill testified in August of 1998 in his deposition, and he had to admit that he had had a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And then he went on air. I happened to be in New York City with somebody at a bar, standing next to the UN ambassador from Australia. I forget the guy's name. And he obviously had direct exposure to Bill Clinton. And he and his wife and me and a friend were watching this thing in some fancy bar in New York City. And as Bill got into it, this diplomat, he started yelling, "You fucking bastard! You lied to my face!" He was yelling, and Bill lied to a lot of people. He's just he and Hillary are congenital liars.
Did you talk to that guy and ask him what he lied about?
Well, it wasn't really appropriate. I mean, I was a banker then, and he was a big deal.
I think it was Susan Weber Wright was the judge.
Right. So you're right. And Susan Weber Wright writes an opinion after that testimony where she tears Bill Clinton apart limb from limb about the odious, and she has to use the word odious, but the odious impact of allowing the most senior legal officer in the land to lie under oath. I mean, that's just, you can't do that, because the second when people are at either a criminal or a civil lawsuit, it's not because we're injecting pixie dust and we're happy and we're about to go have some vanilla ice cream and sniff some Girl Scouts. I mean, it's because, and I'm not saying those are good things, obviously, but I'm thinking about Biden. You're in a contest and you've got exposure, and if you lose, you can lose bigly. So this idea that it's okay for you to shade the truth or say that you don't remember when you do remember, or do the kind of bullshit that people do when they're trying to, when they're playing an inside game, when the press is protecting them, like quibbling with every aspect of the question instead of telling the truth. That's not what you're supposed to do, I don't think. And Bill Clinton made a mockery of the law. Now Joe Biden and his team and Abby Lowell and Hunter Biden are making a mockery of the law. And Fannie Willis and her hooker, her paid lover,
gigolo,
made a mockery of the law. And they should be both disbarred from the legal profession, barred from holding any position of trust, and they should be, people with real resources need to get into what happened. It's not simply that they were having an affair. Both of them got up in this judge's courtroom and lied under oath.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that they don't care about that. How many judges simply don't care? Scott McAfee said that there was an odor of mendacity coming from Fannie. Some people, I think, confuse that with a yeast infection, but this is a fancy judge way of saying she lied.
Again, the law and order people that I'm familiar with would have exacted very harsh penalties at this stage. And, now she's going to get up and she's going to continue to try to go against Donald Trump for lying under oath.
Yeah.
When she lied under oath.
I mean, that's how I'm feeling about it, is that it's ridiculous, Charles. I mean, I'm not defending Scott McAfee for doing this, just trying to understand where he was going. And I think he probably felt personally secure that in doing this, he was stopping short of putting a bullet in the case, but there's an arrow sticking out of it and it's going to walk around in the woods for a few days until it just dies on its own.
Well, when you send a clear message, as the Democrats are sending, and as the Rhino wing of the Republican is sending, that rules are for thee, but not for me, if I'm the elected official, you suddenly increase the value of being an elected official, especially if you're an endemic crook, right? If you can, for a minor sum of money, if you can corrupt a district attorney, and then an attorney general in New York State, and then a governor in New York State, and a mayor in New York City, and a president of the United States, I mean, the total output of the government under the Biden plan is going to approach $7 trillion or more per year. That's a lot of money sloshing around the system. And crooks around the world, if they're not already trying to break into this country across the southern and northern border, they're looking at this and they're saying, okay, Washington, D.C. and the big cities, which are principally Democrat-controlled cities, every single politician is for sale. If I'm in the drug business and I'm getting $100 billion of money per year, hooking up vulnerable people to drugs that are destroying our youth and destroying our younger adults and weakening the integrity of this country, much as the British and the Americans did to China in the Opium Wars. This is benefit, is payback. China looks at this and says it's payback. It's really harmful, and I hope that the people who are running have the gumption to stick it out, to stand tough, to win against the many dirty tricks that are already coming our way, and then to fucking do something about it. I'm not interested in a committee. I'm not interested in in a grand conference or a scream fest.
Yeah.
I'm interested in rounding up the people like Eric Holder is one example. He wears his contempt citation of Congress as a badge of honor, in his words, at the time. This is when Obama was president. He had the balls to say that his job as Attorney General was to be Barack Obama's wingman.
Charles, you're on a bit of a tear here. I got to pause you for a second, though, because we're pushing into our transition time here. We've got to make our way over to the sponsor exclusive segment on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And I need about 30 seconds for people to get pissed off that I'm cutting you off so that I can earn some money and keep this show going. But for people who do appreciate the show, I hope you'll join us for the sponsor exclusive segment. We've got a lot more to discuss about Fani Willis and all of this stuff. So join us in 5 minutes. We'll be right back. And thanks to everybody who sponsored.